Good day, grade fives. My name is Simon Crane. I am Mrs. Crane's husband, and you know that I teach at the high school and I teach English. And for many years, I've taught English from grade 8 to matric. So I have spent a lot of time studying poetry and teaching poetry to pupils in England and here in South Africa. And so it's a great pleasure to be able to spend a little bit of time with you, just going through this 1, 2, 3 smile page with you, and then I'm going to talk to you about a poem. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 smile is, I think, a really good way of getting across the way that you should approach a poem. And I really like what Mrs. Crane has done. In fact, I like it so much that I'm using it with my grade 8s actually that I'm teaching this year, and I think it's a really great way to get a poem, the message of a poem, across to people who read poetry. Okay, so the 1, 2, 3 Smile program that Mrs. Crane has actually spoken to you already about asks you firstly to let's zoom in a bit and have a look. It says, number 1, read the title and the poem carefully. Okay, that's the first thing. So always read the title first. And sometimes the title explains the poem. So the one we're going to do today is called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. And it is actually about a person who stops by woods on a snowy evening. So it's perfectly suited to what the poem is about. So read the title and then read the poem carefully. Now the second point in that list of things, 1, 2, 3, you can see it says there, read the poem again. Okay, read the poem again. Now, so often when you read it the second time, things start to make sense. And I always encourage my pupils to read the poem a second time. So the second time round, it says use smile to help you analyze the meaning of the poem. Underline, circle, or use highlighters and annotate the poem in the margin all around it. And I have a few pens here to help me to annotate the poem. So when I'm doing it with you, you can see exactly what to do. So, okay, let's go back, read the poem first time round, then read it again. And then thirdly, if you look at number 3, it says that some parts of smile will be more important in one poem than another. So you've got to pay attention to which ones are important in this poem that you are reading. And smile stands for structure, meaning, images, language, and effect. Okay, so structure is really simple. Structure is to do with how the poem is built. Let's have a look there. Structure, how many stanzas are there? What is the rhyme scheme? Is there any repetition? Is the rhythm clear? And what does it remind you of? Okay, so structure is all about number of stanzas, rhyme scheme, and rhythm. The second one on the list there is meaning. Okay, what is the mood of the poem? What is the theme, and is there a deeper meaning? So when you read a poem, try to think about what this could be about. What could the meaning of this poem be? Why has the poet written the poem? What is he or she trying to accomplish by writing this poem? Thirdly, images. Images, really easy to understand what images are, because images are the third group, the third column there, the third block, which says, what pictures do you get in your mind when you read the poem? So look for figures of speech, look for similes, metaphor, and personification in the poem. But really, images is all about what pictures you get when you read the poem. What does it create? What picture does it create in your mind? Number 4 is L, smile, L for language. Okay. And with language, what you're trying to do is you're trying to look for effective, unusual, or complicated words. So have a look and see what words the poet has chosen. Look for sound devices, alliteration and onomatopoeia, for example. Poets can use what's called poetic license, which means they can break the rules that you normally are not allowed to break when you're writing an essay or a letter or something. But in a poem, you are allowed to break those rules. You're allowed to have commas and full stops where you might not normally have them. So has the poet used or broken any of the rules or used poetic license. And so that's language. And finally, effect. Okay, what does the poem make you feel? And you may feel quite differently about a poem to the person sitting next to you. They might read the poem and say, it doesn't make me feel that at all. And I think it's really important for you to be able to have an opinion on the poem and for you to be able to explain why you think it makes you feel that way. Okay, so it's very important to understand that your opinion matters. Okay, so what opinion does the poet have? What message is the poet trying to get across? And how does the poem make you feel? All right, so very simply, 1, 2, 3, smile. And I really like it because I'm a very positive person, so I like the word smile. It makes me think of happy faces. 1, 2, 3, smile. Read the poem, read it again, read the title, then look at structure, meaning, images, language, and effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide that to the side, and I'm going to slide in the poem that we're going to look at today. This poem is called, you can see it there, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. So the title right at the top, and I always think it's good to write on a poem, okay, to annotate, all right? So I'm gonna write on this poem, and I'm going to annotate a little bit as we go. So I would say the very first thing that I would annotate would be, I'd make a mark over the word stopping, okay? And I would also just make a little bit of a mark here on snowy evening, because if you think about it, stopping means that you were going somewhere, doesn't it? If you stop, it means that before you stopped, you were going somewhere. So this is about somebody who was going somewhere and who stops in a certain place, and they stop in some woods on a snowy evening. Now, if you ask me, I've lived in England for a number of years, and I've had many occasions in winter in England where it's been snowing, and usually in winter it's nice to be inside and to be somewhere nice and warm near a fire, or to have a nice big mug of Milo in your hand so you've got something warm to drink, or you're sitting near a radiator or a heater of some sort to keep you warm. So stopping by woods on a snowy evening is not the normal thing to do. So straight away, I think it's really important for us to look at the title and say, the title actually makes you think. Okay, it puts a picture in my mind of somebody who perhaps shouldn't really be there. Anyway, let's read the poem and see where we go. All right, so here we go. Let's look at structure first before we even read the poem. Can you see that there are 4 stanzas? Okay, there's stanza 1, all right? There's stanza 2. Oh, it's hard to write when you're not holding the paper. There's stanza 3, and there is stanza 4. Now, each of the 4 stanzas has got 4 lines to it. Okay, so you can see stanza 1 is 4 lines, stanza 2 is 4 lines, stanza 3 is 4 lines, and stanza 4 is 4 lines. So if we move over here, we're already starting to talk about the first one here, structure. How many stanzas are there? All right, we'll get to the rhyme scheme in a minute. But you've already identified that in the poem, there are 4 stanzas, and each stanza has got 4 lines. And we've thought a little bit about the title, and we haven't even read the poem yet. So let's have a look and read the poem and see where we go. Here we go. Follow with me. Okay, I'll go a little closer so you can see it as we go. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So let's look at stanza 1. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Well, that makes me think that the poet, all right, and the poet's name is Robert Frost. That makes me think that the poet is not supposed to be there. He hasn't asked anyone for permission to be there. He's on somebody else's land. He's at a forest or at woods that belong to somebody else, because he says, whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. In other words, he hasn't really got permission to be there. He shouldn't actually be there, and he's stopping somewhere that doesn't belong to him. Okay, so I think that's the very first thing I would say to you is to pay attention to the first stanza of the poem, which kind of identifies what this person is doing and the fact that he shouldn't be there. It says in line 3, he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Now, let's just have a look at stanza 1 and think a little bit about rhyme scheme. I know you've learned about rhyme scheme, so you know that your first line is always marked as A. Okay, because that is the first line, the last word in the first line, and that word is no. All right, so let's have a look at the last word in line 2, though. Now, no and though rhyme, so you can say that if no is A, then though, because it rhymes with no, is also A. Okay, he will not see me stopping here. The last word there is here. It does not rhyme with no or though, so we've got to make that the next letter. We've got to make that a B. Okay, to watch his woods fill up with snow. Now, no, though, and snow all rhyme, so there we go. You can make that an A. So your rhyme scheme of the first stanza of this poem is A, A, B, A. I hope that makes sense, okay? We can do the rhyme scheme of the second stanza in a minute, but let's just move on and talk about it. So the man is stopped at woods that do not belong to him at night. Okay, it's a snowy evening, we know that. In the second stanza, he says, my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. So my little horse must think it queer, must think it odd or strange to stop without a farmhouse near. Okay, so even his horse, all right, I'm going to try and take a different color now. Okay, here we go. So his horse, all right, thinks it is strange. All right, very hard to write when you're not holding the paper. Okay, so his horse thinks it's strange to stop without a farmhouse near. So the rider and the horse both think it's a strange place to stop. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. So in other words, this really is a night that you don't want to be outside, and yet here he is, the poet, outside. Now let's look at the rhyme scheme of stanza 2. You've got queer, that doesn't rhyme with anything that you've seen before, so we make that C. Near rhymes with queer, so we've got C again. Lake is a new sound, doesn't rhyme with anything we've had before, so we make that D. And year rhymes with near and queer, so we make that a C. So look at your rhyme scheme. A, B, A, C, C, D, C. And what we've actually got at the moment is we've got a man stopping snowy woods, at woods on a snowy evening. We know it's the darkest evening of the year. We know that the horse thinks it's strange to stop there. We know the man doesn't have permission to stop there. They're not his woods. And then we carry on. So let's look now at stanza 3. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. Now that's the horse again, shaking his bells, his harness bells, basically asking the rider a question, saying, why are we stopping here? He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. That's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got the horse then asking if the rider has actually thought about this. The horse is actually asking the question of the rider to say, hang on, are you really sure we're supposed to be stopping here? And that echoes the fact that my little horse must think it queer to stop here. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. And then very interesting is the only other sound. Now we're talking about some sounds, okay? So the sounds that the poet hears, move those out the way. The sound that the poet hears is the sound of easy wind. In other words, it's not a very blustery evening, it's just a gentle, easy wind. And the sound of downy flake, the snowflakes falling. Now, I've been in many snowstorms before and seen many snowfalls in England in my time there. Every winter, Christmas and around that time, the snow would fall where I lived. And one of the things I noticed about snow is that it is incredibly quiet. Everything goes very still when the snow starts to fall. In fact, it seems almost like it should be noisy because there's so much snow falling from the sky, and yet it is silent. So there's hardly any sound at all, just the easy wind and the sound of the wind blowing, just gently breezing through the trees, and then the sound of the actual snow itself falling, which is incredibly quiet. All right, let's have a look and see if we've got anything going here with the rhyme scheme. Does shake rhyme with anything that you've seen before? And the answer to that question is no. So we've got to move on. We've got A, B, C, and D covered here. So that is E, okay? And mistake rhymes with shake, so that is also E. Flake rhymes with shake and mistake, so that is also E. But we've got a new sound with sweep. Sweep doesn't match with anything before, so the next letter is F. Okay, so look at your rhyme scheme. A, A, B, A, C, C, D, C, E, E, F, E. And we move to the last stanza of this poem. And this one I really like because this is where the mystery kicks in. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And for me, this is the most interesting part of the poem because number one, you've got this echo here where the lines are repeated. Those two lines are repeated. You've got the idea of the woods being lovely, but I think it's also interesting that they are described as dark because that makes me a little bit nervous. Okay, the fact that the woods are dark and you don't really want to go in there on what is the darkest evening of the year. There's the word dark again, and the woods are deep. In other words, if you go into them, you'll find that it's a very deep and dense forest. And then the poet says, but I have promises to keep. Now it's a bit of a question mark I'd put there because it doesn't tell you what those promises are. In fact, nowhere in the poem do you find out where he's going, what he's doing, and why he's doing it, or why he's stopping. And for me, this is what I really like about this poem, is that it is mysterious. And so the meaning of the poem really is not clear. It is just a mysterious poem about the unknown and about uncertainty. And it doesn't answer any of the questions that you would have. So if you said to me, Mr. Crane, where is this guy going? I would say, I don't know. If you say to me, sir, why does he stop here in the woods? I'd say, I don't know. because none of those answers are given. And I think that is what I really enjoy about this poem, is that it is open to your own interpretation. Then, right at the end of the poem, he repeats, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So you've got, I would say, repetition. Let's see if I can write that without the paper moving. And usually if something is repeated, it is done for emphasis. In other words, you are trying to emphasize something. If I say to you, please go over there and pick up that piece of paper, and you don't do it, and I say, please go over there and pick up that piece of paper, I'm saying it again in order to emphasize it. And the poet, by repeating himself, is emphasizing the fact that he's got a long way to go before he can sleep. Now, let's look at the rhyme scheme. We've got the word deep there, keep, sleep, and sleep. So we know that they all four are exactly the same, but have we got any of the other rhymes repeated? Know, though, hear, snow, none of those appear there. Queer, near, lake, year, none of those are there. Shake, mistake, sweep, oh, hang on, sweep, sweep, deep, keep, sleep, sleep. That's interesting. So actually, that F sound repeats all the way through the rest of the poem. So your rhyme scheme for this poem all the way through is AABA, CCDC, EEFE, and then to finish F, 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 and F. Okay, so let's go back to what we were talking about with structure, meaning, images, language, and effect. So structure we've talked about. 4 stanzas, 4 lines per structure. What is the meaning of the poem? Well, the poet doesn't really answer that question. It is just a mysterious poem about the unknown. What is the theme? Is there a deeper meaning? Well, I think it's about somebody who is trying to find a purpose in their life. And that's what I think it's about. But that's just me. You might feel differently about that. You might say it's about something completely different. But the deeper meaning of the poem is one that you have to think about, and you have to have your own opinion on. Images. What pictures do you get in your mind from reading the poem? Well, if I was to ask you to draw a picture about this poem, if you were to take this poem and I asked you to draw a picture about this poem, well, I'd be very interested to know what you would draw. What I would draw is an open area all covered in snow with mountains all around it, and with a forest with woods with trees there, and a single rider on his own on a horse. But I would have him placed in a very, very big open area, because he says at the end of the poem he has miles to go before he sleeps. Okay, so it needs to be a big, big place. So if you ask me what images I get, or what picture I get from that poem, well, that's what I would say. Then, if you want to look at language, okay, just something that you should look at in the poem, just a couple of things to pay attention to. Look at the punctuation at the end of each line. You've got a full stop there at the end of line 1. You've got a semicolon there at the end of line 2. You've got no punctuation at the end of line 3. And then you've got a full stop at the end of line 4. So the way you'd read that, whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village though, but there's no punctuation at the end of line 3, and it will go like this. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Do you see? I didn't stop at the end of line 3 because there's no punctuation there. Carried straight on to line 4. So very importantly, you need to look at how the poet not only has used words, but how the poet has used punctuation as well. Okay? And you'll see that stanza 2, and I won't go through every stanza, but you'll see at the end of stanza 2, the end of line 5, 6, and 7, there's no punctuation at all. And you'd read that. You have to take a deep breath for that one. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. You can't pause for any breath there because there's no commas or full stops. So again, when you're looking at language, look for the punctuation, the way the poet has used punctuation. Okay, and finally, we've looked at the first four. Look at effect. What does the poem make you feel or think about? And that really is up to you, because I can't tell you what to think about this poem. I can just tell you what I think about this poem, and that is that it's a little bit scary, okay? And the poet shouldn't be there, and he's on his own, and he's only got his horse with him, and he's got a long way to go, and it makes me feel a little bit nervous. And part of the reason why I like this poem is because it doesn't answer any questions. It leaves it all open. Okay, so one last read through the poem just to wrap up, and I hope that you have enjoyed going through this with me. It's called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and it's my favorite poem. And I first read this poem when I was at school, probably in high school, and Robert Frost is an American poet, and he's my favorite poet actually, and this is my favorite poem of his. Let's read it one last time as we close. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harnessed bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. All right, grade 5. I hope you've had a little bit of fun there with me, and it's been a pleasure to have been able to talk you through this poem. I really encourage you to look at what Mrs. Crane has written with the 1, 2, 3 Smile program. Read the poem, read it again, and then look at structure, meaning, images, language, and effect. And really, it's actually quite a lot of fun. I must be honest, I love poetry because it allows me to think whatever I want to think, and to have an opinion on the poem that only I might have. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this poem, and that you find poems in the future that you really enjoy too. Thanks, grade 5s. Have a lovely day. Bye. God bless.